Hello everybody and welcome. We've got a bit of a scoop for you today because we've been given the keys to a brand new 2020 Cadillac CT4. Now, what we're going to try and find out today is whether this smaller replacement for the ATS can really compete with its German rivals. Of course, any review of a modern Cadillac wouldn't be complete without an entire section devoted to waxing nostalgic about the Cadillac of yesteryear, while also bemoaning Cadillac's very confusing current product strategy. So, I'm a sucker for tradition. Let's just get that out of the way.
Growing up, I never really gave much attention to Cadillac, apart from the occasional blip like the Cadillac XLR or seeing an Escalade in a music video. It simply wasn't part of my cultural milieu. It makes me wonder what it must have been like to live in the 1950s and 60s, when Cadillac was in its heyday, when your neighbor buying a Cadillac was considered an event on par with meeting a celebrity. Having said that, I've never rooted against Cadillac. In fact, now that I'm a slightly more seasoned American automotive enthusiast, I would love to see them make a resurgence. Perhaps not to the heights of the 1960s, but at least to be considered on par with their rivals from abroad. Unfortunately, I've found Cadillac's product mix over the last decade or so to be completely perplexing. Their sedan lineup seemed to compete with cars that didn't exist, being either too big or too small to compete with traditional rivals from Germany. The Cadillac CTS, particularly after the second generation debuted, operated in a size category somewhere between a 3 Series and a 5 Series, but was priced to compete with the smaller of the two. Decisions like that seemed almost logical compared to their very late arrival to the small SUV market, seemingly content with dominating the much more limited full-size luxury SUV market with the Escalade. It is only in more recent years that it seems Cadillac has fully committed to the small SUV market, and they're now attempting to offer a new lineup of sedans in the form of the full-size CT6, mid-size CT5, and now the compact CT4, which is designed to take on models like the BMW 1 Series, Audi A3, and Mercedes-Benz A-Class.
Let's start where most prospective buyers will start, and that's with exterior design. I'm just going to come out straight out and say it. I think the CT4 is very good looking. Definitely better looking than the ATS that it kind of sort of replaces. The front end shares a lot with the larger CT6 versus the CT5 model, and I think that's a good thing. The CT6 has slightly more simple front end aesthetic, which I appreciate, but they both have this beautiful teardrop or waterfall headlight that is a great look. I think that this new corporate face for Cadillac is going to be a huge hit, and I really hope that they stick to it and continue to develop it. Speaking of the front faces, here on the grille area, premium and premium luxury models will have more bright work versus the Sport and V-Series cars, which have the blacked out look that you see here.
Come around to the side of the car, and the first thing you notice is the classic sport sedan shape. The long dash to front axle proportions and short rear overhang means that anybody fluent in automotive design will recognize its rear-wheel drive roots from the second they see it. This is a trait that it shares with the outgoing ATS, as the two cars have the same wheelbase. But I think the CT4 manages to look a bit less chunky than the ATS, which I've always found to be slab-sided. The CT4 seems both longer and lower, while still being hunkered down over the rear axle. I love it.
If I have to pick a least favorite part of the car, I'd have to say it's the rear end. I've spent more time with it and I've kind of come around on it a little bit, but I can't help but feel it's a little bulkier than I would like. I do like the integrated rear spoiler here, which I think offers a good resolution for the roof line and the belt line that I mentioned earlier. I also appreciate the dual exhausts, and it's important to notice, while these silver exterior parts are just decorative, there are two real exhaust outlets on either side. Now, perhaps one advantage of this bulky rear end is the fact that trunk space on the CT4 is actually very plentiful, and there is a pass-through between the rear seats. Something that I hear a lot from people, and something that seems to keep a lot of people from buying a Cadillac over its competition, is interior design and material quality. I don't know if the CT4 is a revolution when it comes to that, but I do think it stacks up well compared to its competition like the BMW 1 Series and Audi A3, even if it falls a little bit short of the Mercedes-Benz A-Class.
It's an attractive design that leans more towards the traditional, foregoing the full LCD gauge cluster of the A-Class in favor of a kind of hybrid setup that uses small screens but real needles that seem to float inside dual gauge pods. The large center screen features the latest version of Q, Cadillac's infotainment system. The company has wisely moved away from a largely touch-sensitive interface in favor of more user-friendly controls, a major improvement in my book. Wireless charging is available under the center console, and I love the little pocket behind the shifter they provide for your phone.
Overall material quality is good, with only a couple of obvious exceptions. For example, the plastic over the glove box right here, as well as the kind of faux leather plastic here that surrounds the shift knob. I'm sure that this wears better than real leather, but it's awful hard and seems a little bit cheap. Now, if we go around to the back and take a look at rear seating space. Ow, ow. Okay. So, now that we're in the back seat, I would say that rear seating space is, well, it's nothing to write home about, but that's not particularly surprising given the class of car that this is in. I think that, in my case, I'm a pretty short guy, and I like to sit pretty close to the steering wheel, so I could probably be comfortable for, medium-sized trips in this thing. But if you had a tall man behind tall man situation, it could get mighty uncomfortable mighty quick.
Where Cadillac hopes to set itself apart, however, is in available technology. The CT4 will feature Cadillac's semi-autonomous Super Cruise technology in higher trim models, as well as automated emergency braking and lane keeping assist. All of this is made possible by the all-new electrical architecture. The electrical architecture of a car is something that a vast majority of people don't give a second thought, even automotive enthusiasts. But as consumers demand vehicles with greater and greater levels of technology, their cars must be able to process more and more data, not to mention handle the electrical load that comes from hybrid and full electric drivetrains. The latest Global B electronic architecture, which debuted on the CT5, is designed to do just that, processing 4.5 terabytes of data per hour. It also allows for over-the-air software updates a la Tesla. Electric drivetrains may be the future, but they aren't available on the CT4, at least not yet. No, the CT4 line makes do with a series of turbocharged 4-cylinder gasoline engines. The base engine, as seen fitted in this car, is a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that makes 237 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. Power is sent to the rear wheels courtesy of an 8-speed automatic transmission. Starting at the premium luxury trim, you get a 2.7-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder and a significant bump in power to 309 horsepower and 348 pound-feet of torque, all connected to a 10-speed transmission. Those thirsting for even more power can opt for the CT4V, which uses the same 10-speed but manages to wring 325 horsepower and 380 pound-feet of torque from the 2.7-liter engine.
The CT4 also retains the rear-wheel drive powertrain of the ATS, which, combined with the decent 237 horsepower, means you can do fun stuff like this. Yeah, I know, I probably don't have a future in Formula Drift, but I think you get the point. It's very fun to drive. The ATS was known for having one of the best chassis in its class in terms of grip, steering feel, turn-in, all of that, thanks in part to its 50-50 weight distribution. Well, the CT4 has retained that 50-50 weight distribution, and as far as I can tell, it's managed to retain pretty much all the great handling characteristics of the ATS as well. On top of that, it certainly seems as though they've been able to add in some comfort. The ATS was always a little bit stiffer, a little bit harder riding than its competitors, but the CT4 driving around town is incredibly comfortable. The only thing that I can see is that the new 2-liter engine is definitely down on power compared to the old one. That's not, especially surprising. It's now in a smaller size category in a cheaper class, so it doesn't need the big 272 horsepower number. But the 0 to 60 time does suffer. This one is about 7 seconds versus low 6s for the old ATS. Speaking of that engine, I'm afraid that the new 2-liter doesn't offer much in the way of audio pleasure. I find it to be pretty,
how to put it? Well, it's not nice. Just kind of sounds like a general standard 2-liter engine. I'm not really sure why they decided to pump more of that sound into the cabin through the speakers. But the reality is that the engine was never really the star of the ATS line, except for maybe the ATS V. It was really all about the chassis, and like I said, it's managed to retain a vast majority of the driving pleasure that the ATS had with a little bit of added comfort. Under these circumstances, it's hard to tell if the CT4 has actually sacrificed some of the raw handling prowess of the ATS at the altar of low-speed comfort. Let's assume for argument's sake that that's exactly what Cadillac has done. Would that really be a good idea? I think the answer is yes. You see, the ATS might have been a better handling car than its competitors, but that didn't mean much to a lot of prospective buyers. I'm sure you're aware that most test drives don't include mountain roads. They're 10 to 15 minute trips around the block, so people really only have time to see how the car handles at low speeds and over bumps in the road. They'll be able to gauge the steering feel, throttle response, and brake feel, all of which are good on the CT4. The only real performance they'll likely be able to measure is the car's power as it merges onto the highway. In that context, a car's turn-in and grip don't matter as much as its comfort and torque off the line. This new car provides that. So while it might not tackle the Nürburgring like an ATS, it does feel good during that test drive. Combine that with the improved infotainment, and I think that this car is likely to appeal to a greater number of buyers. While I might not follow Cadillac's every move, I can't help but cheer for them. I can't help but want them to win. I want them to be around for the next generation of American automotive enthusiasts to be able to see and appreciate. If that means they have to strike a better compromise between comfort and sportiness that sacrifices some of the base car's handling poise at 10/10 on a mountain road, I'm fine with that. Those seeking greater handling and speed can always turn to the performance variants. Leave the base model for those that don't really care, because those people make up a majority of buyers.
All right, that's our review of the brand new 2020 Cadillac CT4. Thanks to Cadillac for lending us the car, and thanks to you for watching. Bye-bye.